My guest today is the legendary comedian Greg Proops, who has been performing comedy for as long as I have just about cared about comedy, which is a rather long time indeed, and he performs it at the highest level. You may also know him from voice work, for example, in Tim Burton's The Nightmare Before Christmas, Disney's Brother Bear, Star Wars The Phantom Menace, and of course, Bob the Builder. And depending on how much entertainment you explore, like, no, your voice is kind of all over. Your thumbprint is in many places. And a regular performer with Whose Line Is It Anyway? And he barnstorms around the country with a traveling version of that called Whose Live Is It Anyway? His new album is called Free State of California, and it makes me want to live there. So, Greg, welcome.
Hi, Mr. King. What a pleasure to be back on.
Well, it's exciting to hear the, new record, and you make fun of the title of the old record, which was Purple Shasta Raccoon. I don't know. It sounds like it should be a Grateful Dead record.
Right? I mean, that was my call, but yeah, the getting people to understand what the title was, like I did a few mainstream radio interviews on that one, and I would say Purple Shasta Raccoon, and they'd be like, you might as well have spoke Greek to them because they literally were like, what is it? And I'm like, it's a joke about weed. And then, oh, never mind. So the alternate titles for this one were OK Tiger. Because if you recall, there's a track on here where a guy spills something, and I say to him, "What are you drinking?" And he says, "Sprite." And I go, "Okay, Tiger." And my producer Ryan thought "Okay, Tiger" was the funniest title you could ever have, but Jennifer won out on this one, and she wanted Free State of California. So
I think when in doubt, go with whatever Jennifer recommends. That would be
I agree, John.
My advice.
That's a very good rule of thumb for me. The fun part is when I make the record, I improvised it. And then you didn't ask this question, but I'm going to tell you anyway. The last step is now, of course, when you listen back to it, you can have it transcribed by whatever robot does that. So I can actually look at the words. They're not all right, which is hilarious because it's some sort of, so the words are wrong and the context is wrong. But then I go through that and then I send that to my producer, which gives him a much clearer picture because you get to see it. And then the next step is he does a little breakdown on it. And then he brings it back to me and he comes over to my house and we sit at the dining room table and they drink wine and I smoke a joint and we listen to it. And I watch Jennifer and Ryan, and if they laugh at anything, then I know it's good. And sometimes I'll go, this was terrible. And they'll both turn to me and go, no, it was really funny. And then I defer to them because that's called being an artist, you allowing other people to, tell you what's good and don't be married to every goddamn thing. Also, I want it to be better because I'm improvising it. So it's really hard to go back and find a take where it's better, like word perfect. That's not going to happen. So I have to be loose about that. But I really do depend on their opinion because you were talking about the podcast, or you and I were off the air. I've been doing the podcast for over 10 years. And Ryan, when we did it live, might have heard more podcasts than any human of me doing it. And then Jennifer, of course, has had to listen to me since the late 70s, early 80s. So if there's two people who know when I'm being funny and when I'm not being funny, it's them. So no one asked how I made the album, but I just thought I'd tell you anyway in case
I am a brilliant interviewer, so that question was going to come up, but you've rendered that question unnecessary. Yeah. I do remember at some point, I think texting, and you said, oh yeah, I'm, working on the editing and it's kicking my butt a little bit. I said, oh, I could help. I need to point out, for the record, I thought you meant like in terms of like the sound quality or like something about that. I was not, at no point was I going, oh yes, I am equipped to enter show business and offer Greg professional advice about the content of the album.
Yeah. Yeah,
So,
the sound quality is what it is, as my manager would say. A very Hollywood thing to say. And it is what it is means I'm not going to help or make it better in any way. Um, but yeah, we get what we get with the sound quality. It's generally pretty good broadcast quality. But yeah, it's all about where we're cutting and which takes we're using. And usually, like sometimes I do a lot of shows. This time it was 4 shows, and this coming up one, it'll be 4 shows. The first show, I kind of get out there and blast off. And then I sort of, because people keep going to me, do you really improvise it? And it's like, yeah, I do. But improv is a process too. And I might tell the same story 3 or 4 times over the 4 shows and make it better or expand it or add to it or detract from it or whatever. So that's improvising as well in my book. Um, it's different than, like, say, at the ballpark or the Resistance, those albums, which I really went out and bang, bang, bang in clubs over and over, over did the material, which is the traditional way that all comics do it. They go out every night, they record it, you do the same routine 20 million times until you get the words right. Seinfeld in the old days used to say, transcribe what you do and take a red pen to every superfluous word, right? Which is a very good rule, I think, for writers too.
yep.
Although I'm a big fan of the superfluous word school. So I'm a little more Flann O'Brien than I am Hemingway.
Yeah, you're more James Joyce than Ernest Hemingway.
Yeah, I like James Joyce works for me because
Hemingway is great.
Then it's yeah.
But
Yeah. I mean, your book has so much stream of consciousness and forcing you to deal with different changes and everything. And that's how I like to play. I really feel like, we're at such a post. What it was, there was a great TV show. Just because I want to use this quote, there was a show a few years ago with Kevin Bacon and Catherine Hahn and Griffin Dunn. And it took place at the writers, what do they call it in Marfa, Texas? You know how
oh,
Well, Marfa, Texas has this like writers colony or whatever.
okay.
It's very pretentious and very fantastic, right? So all the writers come together. And Griffin Dunn has written a book about the Holocaust, and Catherine Hahn's his wife, and she's a filmmaker, and she's made this indie film and neglected to get the rights to the music that she used in the indie film. So the indie film is taken from her, and now she has no film to promote. So she goes to Marfa with her husband, and everyone she meets goes, "Oh, you're the Holocaust book wife," like over and over. And Kevin Bacon is the eminence, right? He's the gray eminence who runs the place, and he's terse, and he rolls his own cigarettes, and he wears tight jeans, and he's hard to get to know. And he says in one scene, "I'm post idea," which I thought was the funniest fucking. So now that we're post idea, I think people are used to that kind of jumping back and forth TikTok nonsense where you really needn't. You don't have to explain every goddamn thing you're going to say, and you don't have to put context on every moment. You can jump a little bit. I mean, Lenny Bruce, to me, I think is the first comic that I remember listening to where he would say in his routines, "cut to," like in the middle of a routine, he'd go, "Here comes the
Yeah.
warden, cut to the thing," meaning audiences in the 50s and 60s were absolutely ready for that kind of editing, that kind of movement in a comedy routine. They didn't go, "What do you mean cut to?" They were like, "Oh, we watch movies."
Yeah, that's what would be in a screenplay. Okay. Yeah, no, this
Yeah.
is like straight from the screenplay.
And I love that. I love when people mess with time. I
Well,
love traditional stand-up too. I mean,
but you're an artist, and that could be death to a comedian, but it seems to me like my favorite comedians, part of what they're looking for is transformation, right? It's not, oh, aren't we above the world we're living in, and isn't it stupid, and aren't we better than the world? Although sometimes that needs to be said, and you've said it, but right, that would be a sad place to just rest.
Yeah.
And so we need some kind of transformation. And, Seinfeld is brilliant. And I do think his sitcom could cause transformation. I'm
Hmm.
not sure a stand-up can do that. And that's not me putting down the stand-up. If I got the chance to see him, yeah, I would go see him. But, if I could go see you or him, like, all right, the choice is already made. Like, I don't have to think that hard about it. And it's because, despite the fact that I've been following you for years, I have no idea what the fuck you're going to say.
I'm hoping that's the fun of it, I mean, I think Seinfeld, like you say, I think his sitcom was amazing because it was the most misanthropic and hedonic, you know, he liked toys. And what was the one where he makes the girl eat a bunch of turkey and wine so he can play with the toys at her house? I mean, like, there's some really creepy, fantastic. Oh, and the other one where the Roy Rogers is across the street and the light's shining through the window and he can't sleep.
It was Kenny Rogers.
Kenny Rogers, that's right.
Kenny.
Not Roy Rogers.
Yeah.
I love that one. And what is it? I think he comes down and he's mad and all his friends are there and he goes, "I can't live on the red planet." And that one made me really laugh. And there's another one where there's a mannequin's dummy, like in the movie Magic, and it walks across the room at the end and all that. I appreciated that. His stand-up is anodyne and was never there to accomplish anything. He's a superb craftsperson. He's very funny. He's very clever. No one cares about airlines or washing machines or socks or any of that in a deep and abiding way. It's merely, I don't like the word glib that much, but it's a cursory look at our humanity. It's a surface look, and there's nothing wrong with that, as he would say. There's nothing wrong with that, but it's not. My favorite comics in high school were George Carlin, Lily Tomlin, Richard Pryor, then later Robin. Horribly, as I got to know Joan Rivers in the 2000s, and I got to work with her a little bit, I realized that I was closer to her in demeanor than almost any other comic, which really shocked me. Because Joan was sort of openly cruel, and really funny. And her process was diligence. The night she passed away, she did a set at a gay club in New York and recorded it and came home and listened to it. I mean, that's how she worked. She was 81 years old. She recorded every bloody show and she went home and listened to it right after to fix those jokes, She had the funniest joke I've ever heard. It's so I won't contextualize. Here's the joke. She goes, "When I was a little girl, I wrote a letter to Hitler. And I said, there's a couple in Teaneck, New Jersey you should look in on." and I can't think of a more brilliant, morbid, pointed, horrible, fantastic joke than that. It works on every level. And the crowd, I thought, was going to lose their mind. She did it with me at a talk show here in LA, and I became, of course, incapacitated. I think the other thing is, like you say, you have to be able to laugh too and be a fan of other comics. Obviously, I burn with jealousy and I'm, horrible about people that I don't think are funny succeeding, but I can't really talk about it or let it burn me up every day. The comics that I think are funny, I really do enjoy laughing at them,
Well, how can you let it bother you? You're the smartest man in the world.
Right? Horribly, I'm not the most centered man in the world.
We probably shouldn't go too far down this line of inquiry, but there are comedians, like top of their game comedians who, if they describe their comedy careers and who they knew, you could be intimidating. Like you probably don't intimidate you because you're not trying to intimidate you. You're just being you. And it takes some energy to do that.
I'm not sure I understand what you're saying, John.
I'm saying before you called yourself the smartest man in the world with a slight, degree of irony, like I might be, or at least probably in this room I might be.
Yeah.
But, I think a lot of other comics have felt like, oh, you are the smartest guy in the room.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah, they are. Years ago, Mary Lynn Rice-Cube said to me, "You're intimidating." I asked her why she was being fussy with me, and she went, "You're intimidating." And she goes, "First of all, you wear dark glasses in a comedy club." And I got on stage and I said, "The reason I wear dark glasses in a comedy club is that I don't fucking want to see you. How's that grab you, audience?" And I remember starting in a show in England with "Shut Up." and the critic saying, I can't believe that he started a show with shut up. Now, having said that, Jennifer and I went to see George Carlin 25 years ago, and he got a standing ovation when he walked out. This was at the Comedy Store, not a big stadium, but the little, 200 seater at the Comedy Store. George Carlin came out, the place stood up, screamed, 10 minutes of cheering, and he went, fuck you. That was his opener. And then he went, I just want to make you feel at home. And at that point, I buckled because I was like, I knew I loved you. And now I really love you. A friend of mine, when I started the podcast, I was debating different titles. And I called a guy who's a writer mostly and a producer named Phil Bowman. And he's a smart guy. I wouldn't say he's the funniest guy, but he's great at being a producer, and an editor. And he said to me, here's the idea. Call yourself the smartest man in the world, take questions from the audience, and brook no dissent. And I was like, that is hilarious. And so I did it. And it was like, I would do radio shows years ago, and every male DJ would go, well, how come you're the smartest man? And that was always the second question. And I'd say, it's a joke. And then they'd be like, oh, you didn't get the main joke. So, but yes, intimidating people is not a terrible thing. And it's a great way to, I think, approach an audience, slap them around a little bit.
George Carlin was transformative for me. I want to say I was 12 when his Carnegie Hall special broadcast. And that was the perfect age for me, probably not for my parents, who gave me nominal permission to watch that while they were playing bridge with my grandmother. And so I'm watching in another room. And then after their bridge game, they turned it on for his never-ending scroll of dirty words. And that's the only part they caught. And they're like, oh, that's what he asked permission to watch. And my dad's like, too late now. And then whenever George Carlin came into town, Dad and I went to go see him.
See, really?
Yeah.
That's great.
That was maybe the most special bonding he and I did as father and son. Go listen to the dirty old man say all kinds of scandalous and interesting things.
He's rare. And on that same set, when I saw him, he hadn't memorized a routine. And he said, do you mind if I read this to us? And he said, I don't improvise, I memorize. And he took out a wadded up piece of paper that fantastically, you could see when he took it out, wasn't written on, it had been printed. So he had typed it on his computer, printed it, and he read it out. And it was just as funny. Like I always said to Jennifer, when you would see him on talk shows toward the end of his life, he didn't talk that much. He would wait and then say one or two lines, and the lines were devastating. And I said, he's becoming more and more like Beckett because he's boiled it all down to these three thoughts, as opposed to rambling on and on and on. Or he knew the medium he was in a talk show. There's no way you can spiel the way I do in a format where you have a minute to talk or 30 seconds. Yeah. And he had figured out that in the 1 hour format, he could go all over the world. And then on that format, he had to just boom. It had to be a dart or more like an arrow. His way of working was, years ago, I did that Musso and Frank thing. And the guy who produced it, Neil Marshall, was Carlin's producer. He did all his HBO shows. And he gave me some tips, which were so fantastic. He said, write about what you know, which I was like, okay. And then he was like, do this, do that. And I thought, you're used to working with a person who is the most meticulous craftsman that ever lived. I got in there on the day and I winged half of it. And I did some of it that I knew. And I combined them together and it came out okay. And then everyone was mad at me because there was nothing to edit. And but I thought, I was thrilled to work with Carlin's producer, but at the same time, it was like, you have to understand, I don't work like him at all,
Live at Musso and Frank didn't come out okay. It came out great. It's one of my favorite comedy specials that I could watch of all time. Your half-hour comedy special from Comedy Central from back in the day also would make that list. But Live at Moso at Frank's was truly special because it seemed like a birthday present to yourself. Like, okay, it's one of your favorite restaurants in the world with some of your favorite people in the world. And
Yeah.
you're like, oh, I could do it at a comedy club, or I could do it at the most historic restaurant in Hollywood.
Yeah, I don't want to take credit or nothing, but you notice that after that, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood is there, and every single TV show is shooting there, and they hadn't had anyone shoot there when we did it, which was 2013, 2014, whenever it was. They hadn't had anyone shoot there in ages. It was not forgotten, but it was coming back, and now, of course, everyone shot there because it's so beautiful. And sadly, Sergio uh, and Ruben are gone. But Jennifer and I went a couple of months ago with some friends and had a swing in time. Uh, yeah, that I really enjoyed. I really enjoyed doing that. I need to do another video, but I have to organize it, and I'm so fucking lazy. Everyone does all their videos and puts stuff up on the Instagram all the time, and I'm always like, I don't know. I mean, I know it helps sell everything, but when I see people doing crowd work on Instagram, I think, oh God, what are you, an open micer? I've been around way too long to want to do crowd work. Having said that, of course, there's some crowd work on the album, but that was hilarious, spontaneous crowd work. The idea of me asking someone what they do for a living at this point in my career is completely not going to happen.
You're high energy. In fact, I want to say the last time I saw you with Who's Live, at the beginning of the show, you pogo onto the stage. I'm younger than you, and if I had to pogo on a stage, like, okay, for $1 million, I would do it, but I would need days to recover. So how do you stay so youthful and energetic?
It hurts. It hurts. Have a dazzling variety of ailments like anyone my age. You know, Mostly it's the love of getting out there every night. When we talk about it in the group sometimes, especially with times being what they are, people really, really want to get it on and lose themselves for an hour and a half. And that's all we're trying to do up there. Yeah, we'll do some topical material, but it's an improv show. If it's my stand-up show, I can do whatever I want. I can be vicious and mean and topical and talk about politics. In an improv show, politics can enter into it, but it is never going to be the general theme. Plus, I'm not captaining the ship. I got a lot of people to share with. So you're in a band. If I'm the bass player, I can't go, now we're having a 30-minute bass solo or whatever. But the traveling and all that nonsense is the worst, is the work. And then the 90 minutes a night where we get to dance and sing and act like idiots is the fun part, is the reward, if you will. I mean, Jennifer would certainly tell you that the shallowness of performers is never to be underestimated. And that literally, we were watching a show last night where a woman was telling, and a British actress was telling a story. And she said she got the news that her husband died right before the show. I know it was. Was it the woman from the 3 Degrees? Deb, what's her name, from Ferguson from the 3 Degrees, said that someone came into her dressing room before a 3 Degrees show and went, John's dead. And she went, John who? And they went, you're John. And she went, oh. And then she goes, and I thought, should I go on? And then I went on and I gave this great show. And then I came off and I cried back in my room. And I said, you may remember a National Lampoon routine from the 70s where they do Al Jolson. And he goes, Lou Dockstader came into my room and had a heart attack and died. And I went on stage. What a show that night. 32 encores. Jolie, they said. Jolie, we want Jolie. And I want you to know that never once when I was on stage did I ever think about Lou Dockstader lying dead in my dressing room. And that I think is how all performers are. We're like dogs, if you tell us we're good and we'll run around in a circle, So that's part of what keeps me going like that and youthful. And also the show's fun. We don't hate each other. Yeah, there's always bullshit. I'm in a group. I mean, when you're in a band, but we're not like the Who. We don't take 4 separate cars, and we still speak to each other. And believe it or not, we eat dinner together before the show every night. generally. I mean, you can take your food to your room if you want, but we get takeout food and then we usually all sit together and bullshit. So that's a good sign. That means we're not, you know, doing that. What was that old Brett Butler joke? You're going to breathe in, you're going to breathe out. It's so repetitive, you know.
Well, I teach students of writing, and a lot of them want to work in entertainment. And, maybe your most important skill as a writer is don't be so big of an asshole that no one wants to work with you.
There's one. Although
Like quality, that comes after being easy to work with.
Easy to work with is very important. I found early on, don't say things that can't be unsaid to people. Don't tell them they're a C-bomb or whatever, or that you hate them or that they're not talented, because certainly you're going to have to deal with them again. And they'll always remember that you said that. So that's good. It's good to get along with people. As far as being a giant asshole, who's that guy who writes Yellowstone and all those shows? That he's a famous TV writer now, and he's just changed studios from one studio to another. And he works with another famous asshole, Kevin Costner, right? He writes every word himself, and it's always about this Americana jazz, and he's kind of right wing, and the whole, and evidently not easygoing yoga, as they say. But so yes, but I would still agree with you. It's very good to be a team player. It really helps. I've always loved being the times that I've got to be in a team. I've always liked it. I do, of course, love playing by myself as well, because then you have all the control. But I do love being in a group. I mean, I've been in a group for 100 years now, and we've been on the road for 20 something years together. We did 110 dates this year, and we're doing another 100 dates next year. So, the other day on the bus, we were having a little discussion, and Ryan sits in the back of the bus, and it's his show. He's the star, right? And Ryan goes, and he's very laconic. He goes, "Did you guys talk about retiring in that conversation?" And I couldn't resist from where I sit. I'm in the second row with the musicians. I said, "Retiring from what?" I said, "Retiring to what?" And he said, fantastically, there was a beat. And from the back, I heard, "To watching tapes of this show." So I knew he wasn't serious. I think he was testing the water, like, should we quit, And everybody in the group kind of froze, like, don't say quit, because we need this.
I've seen a bunch of the show, and I've tended to live versions. And, the show, it's one of those things, I mean, you've made fun of improv, like, why not prepare something funny?
Yeah.
And I'm capable of being a snob. I totally am. I think I dress like a snob every day, even though, like, I don't know that that's where I am at my heart. I just know I can get away with more if I dress like an adult from the 1940s. So,
oh yeah.
When I go see Whose Live Is It Anyway? Like, whose line is it anyway? Yeah, there will be times it's very funny, and there aren't any great lulls. Like, it's reliable, it's funny, it's silly. It's also going to rely on a lot of slapstick and jokes, like dick jokes, like whatever's going to work in 8 seconds or less sometimes is, where you gents have to go, where you performers have to go. It's not 100% gents, but when I go see Whose Live Is It Anyway? I'm not exactly sure what it is other than maybe just sharing the space,
Right.
with the performers. I think the last time I passed out for a second. I was laughing so hard. And I wasn't quite, like, it gets funnier than I was prepared for it to be.
Gosh, that's complimentary.
I hope the audience has something to do with that. As a teacher, I use the Socratic method, Greg. And what that means is I make shit up. Like, I'll have a direction I want to go into, but I ask questions and I try and get the students really engaged and involved. And when I used to teach like 3-4 times a day, it's like, okay, I've got the same shtick 4 times. And like, sometimes it's, if I had come in and not spoken, it would have amounted to the same thing. And other times, the students just really come alive and I can see them learning and I get the high of teaching when I see, smart people getting smarter because I'm asking them questions and we're kind of, building some wisdom together. And students teach me, one of the reasons why I'm so smart is because my students teach me things and then I teach students things. But, I'm like a supercomputer in that respect. But supercomputer or not, sometimes I go in like my best effort and the students are like, is he speaking English? I don't know what this is. So can you talk a little bit about crowd control or the energy of the crowd for your shows?
Well, at the improv show, we're really, really relying on the crowd. And I notice, of course, because I come out first, whether they're already enthusiastic or they need to be goosed a little bit. Sometimes they're out of their minds. Like we did a show in New Orleans a couple of weeks ago before we wrapped it up. And that New Orleans crowd was as psyched and awesome as any crowd I've ever played for. Everyone we brought out of the crowd was a petty criminal or had some shady past. And they were
everyone was from New Orleans.
Collar. Yeah, they were exciting. They were an exciting group. And then sometimes you're in front of people who are very controlled, very measured, very white. And we will say after the show to each other, it was hard work up till this point, and then we got them. Or it was hard work the whole way, and then at the end they all stood up. So we didn't expect that because they were so quiet. So you never really know. In England, I learned from years of touring there that English crowds sometimes will sit silently through an entire hour and a half and then stand up and go batshit at the end. So they've got that Japanese thing going where like, we're not going to show you, but we're going to tell you at the end how much we loved it. Now with stand-up, years ago, my friend Matt Weinhold said to me, your style of comedy is you tell one joke and then you spend 10 minutes berating the crowd for not getting it, why they should have thought it was funnier. And I kind of subscribed to that. And also what my description of my own comedy was adjective, profanity, and then be mean to the crowd. So I feel like I learned from playing overseas in my 30s that you can beat them up a little bit and they really enjoy it. So if you're in the South, you can make fun of how they act in the South. When you're in the Northeast, England, Ireland, Canada, whatever, wherever you are, the context is always, you need to be told how you're acting and how you come off. Sometimes it doesn't work. I remember playing Phoenix years ago, and my opening joke was, remind me what it is you hate the most here in Arizona. Is it Mexicans, gays, or women? And they didn't find that humorous. And then Jennifer, I always have to go to what she says to me, which is, I'll say this pointed, amazing satirical thing that I've been working on for so long is yielding little to any fruit. And she'll say, have you thought about doing a funny voice? And then I'll do a funny voice and it'll work. And so then we go back to the Jonathan Winters, Sid Caesar, Robin Williams School of Comedy, where you say the most horrible thing, but you do it in a really lovable character or a funny voice, and then everybody is on board. So I've really tried to lean on that a little harder recently. But as far as crowd control, there's times in the old days when I felt like giving up on a crowd because I hated them so much, because they were Nazis or whatever reason I came up with in my Edgar Allan Poe Cask of Amontillado,
You were in a casino in New Jersey.
Right. They slighted me some way. And so therefore I hate them and I want them to die. And now I try not to feel that way as much. Although on the new album, as I had forgotten it, but John Fugelsang pointed out to me that I opened the album by berating them in the opening track for like 5 minutes. And he's like, not a lot of comics would start their album with that. And I thought, oh shit, you're right. But they were so terrible when I went on in that set because they hadn't laughed at my friends who were on before me, Jill and Dia. And I tend to be partial. If you don't think the people I think are funny, then you're going to hear about it. And but I think it's always about confidence. The trick of like teaching, and it's so amazing to hear you talk about going on and doing the same thing for one class and they don't like it at all, and another class absorbs it immediately and gives you back the thing that you want from them, which is dialogue, right? And since on Greece here and Socrates, who by the way was a veteran of the war as well as being a bisexual weirdo, he was not a big sissy who sat around thinking of ethereal things. He was pretty nuts and bolts, is my understanding of Socrates. And then who was his student? Plato. So the only reason we know anything about Socrates is that Plato evidently wrote it all down or whatever.
Plato, the bookish one.
Yeah, then Plato thought that democracy was the stupidest thing that had ever been invented, so and that there was no way it could work. And of course, he's right. But what was I going to say? With teachers, when I was a student, if they showed any weakness, that was when it was over, So, like you say, if you dress with authority and act with authority, they almost always go with you. What's that line in Bull Durham? The manager says to Kevin Costner, "I don't know what to do with these players." And Kevin Costner goes, "They're young, scare them." So with the stand-up crowd, they're dying for you to be good. Even if it's an open mic, even if it's a 5-minute set, literally the crowd is pining in their soul for you to come on and have 5 great jokes like that and just murder them. That's what they want. They don't want you to hem and haw, hesitate, think, what should I talk about? What's going on? What do you guys want to do now? Any of that waffling bullshit. And I watched it in England in the 90s when I was a comic there. Comics would get up at clubs and go, yes, in the shop. And, so I go in the shop and like, it's shit, right? Like the shop shit. And and I would think, you guys, get to the fucking magic here, So I'm a lot more attuned to that. With me, it's a matter of I have a big dick and I'm going to swing it. And that's how you're going to know that it's okay. Like I'm giving you permission to react however you want because I'm in control up here. Even if I'm letting it completely get away from me, even if I forget what I say, even if I can't stay on track, I'm still going to come back and, be the controller.
And that decisiveness is everything. You've got a bit, not a timely bit, although I think it's important that it's not a timely bit actually, because one of your opening moves for the new album was, we're not even going to talk about it, meaning the election. And eventually you do go on a tear. That's brilliant. And it might be the best part of the record. But initially you're like, okay, we're not going to talk about it. We're not going to talk about it. So that, all right, what are we going to focus on? And you're like, so I got high and went to the Nixon Museum. And do you know he's talking to me from the afterlife? And it's like, you declared a topic and it's, you know what? I'm all in. I'm completely in. Yeah, I would much rather hear about dead Nixon than our current political predicament. If it's, at this point, I'm not even sure the word political describes anything.
It doesn't.
Existential predicament.
We've gone so far past satire. I mean, if Tom Lehrer said when, Kissinger got the Nobel Prize for Peace, that satire is dead. There's what are you supposed to do as a comedian? And I've had to listen for 10 years, although it's eased up, I noticed during this last year. The first term of The Great Pumpkin, people would never endingly say to me, and all comics, it must be so great because there's so much material. And I was like, well, no, I don't think Weimar comics during the 30s were like, man, this Hitler is really lighting up my cabaret act. Finally, I found some really, I can make fun of the mustache and the goose step and his girlfriend is egregious. And no, it's horrible. So I totally get what you're saying. that album, it was recorded right after the election and before the inauguration. And the audience in San Francisco was physically agitated. So the idea of bringing it up or his name or anything. So I went, we're not going to talk about it. And then took the back door in. Let's talk about all the old conservatives and how fucking horrible they were. Because people keep saying conservatives used to be different and it was so great. They were so human and they were so this and that. And then he made it different. And it's like, no, he put a different face on it. They were always this way. That's why they were conservatives. It's like saying the rebels in the Civil War really had this wonderful cause, but over the years it just got distorted.
Yeah, except for that one little thing. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's like, no, there's always been horrible, racist, hideous Nazi white people
Oh,
in this country. They founded the country. So the idea that you're surprised now that one of them has the conch and won't let it go and is acting like a Nazi when they got it is like, well, how is that surprising to you? I assure you that James Knock Polk was no fun to hang out with, you know, or or Franklin Pierce or whatever, one of the great, how many presidents owned slaves? Eight or nine out of the 47. So it's like, well, that's kind of a high strike rate, isn't it? So are we supposed to forget that that all happened, and that they were really once wonderful because Eisenhower was a polite person who was brave?
well, we're supposed to pretend it didn't happen because otherwise we might have feelings about it.
Mm.
And to the point, oh, Republicans, they used to stand for something. I'm like, yeah, Eisenhower, he was not the worst.
No.
Nixon, Reagan, Bush Jr. It's like, oh, so we just dumbed down the presidency and then they commit all of these crimes and
Mhm.
decimate the economy, and then we have amnesia about it. That seems to be the
Yep.
pattern.
Not one of them was successful. All of them left under a cloud. All of them were terrible. All of them were, although I wouldn't say Nixon and Herbert Walker were stupid. Reagan was a moron, and W was a screaming moron, and the current one is beyond contempt. So it's like, that's why I couldn't resist when we started talking about Reagan on the album to go, those of you who aren't old enough to remember, in 1979, we felt the world had ended because we elected a shitty actor as president. And because people have no context for anything. And it's like, you're old enough to remember when he got elected, people were like, oh my God, what did we do? We've literally made a crappy actor who's stupid. Yeah, he'd been governor. So what? Everyone's governor. Hulk Hogan was governor. You know what I mean? Like, or no, he wasn't, but you know what I mean?
Jesse
It's
Ventura.
like he was governor.
Jesse Ventura was governor.
Yeah, well, and fair enough. Same difference. And, so that's one way to, I mean, this year, if I laid in directly and went on stage and just started in on him immediately and all of his sins, people would like it and people would think it's funny. But there's got to be another way to come around the corner and address it without directly, one, saying his name all the time, two, acknowledging him. He's taken up too much space in all of our psyches and all of our emotional life. And I think that's what people resent most of all, which is why there's this huge thing on social media right now. I don't know how much you're on social media, but
Too
it,
much.
yeah, me too. Um, that everyone wants him to die, and are openly stating it basically now, like over and over again in a million different ways. And I won't say it directly, of course, but if I say, for when it happens, this is what I'm going to do, everyone knows exactly what you mean. You don't have to say his name anymore. And that's a state of like, where are we at, John, when you don't have to say his name, only how you feel about him, it, them, and everybody knows. Like, so comedically, like you say, politics is a really shitty way of putting what we're dealing with here. And when I hear people say, and they still do say it because you know how people are annoying, um, I don't really get into politics or I don't pay attention, that kind of stuff.
Oh,
I
so
always
you're rich
think,
and you're white. Oh, cool. Good for you.
exactly.
That's
Was it Pericles? I can't, who said, which tyrant of Athens said, if you don't take an interest in politics, it will take an interest in you. because the people who think they're above it or beside it or whatever just make me, wow, you guys. On the other hand, it can't be the all-consuming, all-encompassing focus of your life. You still have to look at the sun.
Well, and we
And
can't reason our way out of this, because if we wouldn't have been here if that were possible.
thank you. There is no reason because it's not reasonable at all. So, and comedy requires a jumping off point, and the jumping off point is reason. If the world is Margaret Dumont and we are the Marx Brothers, there has to be a Margaret Dumont, to represent stability and society. But when the person who's running the show is mad, on the other hand, I think about the 70s and what we were talking about, George Carlin and Pryor, whatnot, Lily Tomlin, or the 60s and Mort Saul and Lenny Bruce. And there's never been a non-tumultuous decade. There really hasn't. People say the 50s were so non-tumultuous. If you were black or gay or a woman, the 50s were possibly the biggest bummer that ever happened, especially considering they made this big promise to you during World War II that we were all going to be on one team. And then, oh, wait a minute, did we say that? We meant fuck you. So the idea that it's going to...
Did we say that?
Easy,
yeah.
Yeah, I don't buy that it used to be good and now it's bad, and therefore it's really hard for us to get along. We had the awesome stability of Clinton, Obama, and 4 years of Biden, because as you said, when a Republican's president, there's nothing but ruining the economy and making chaos. And when a Democrat's president, they tend to, build a road.
They do homework. They stay up late thinking about shit and making plans.
Every single Democratic president, which is why when they talk about JFK, there was a book when I was little called A Day in the Life of a President by Jim Bishop, I think it was. And I remember reading it well after JFK was dead. I'm not that bloody old. One of the things they mentioned in the book was, and this is pre-internet days, this is the telex and those kind of machines. JFK got up every morning and read 7 newspapers, including the foreign ones. Before he walked into the office, he had his coffee and he read the New York Times, the Post, the London Times, maybe Le Monde or some, American versions of foreign, maybe the International Herald, so that he could understand. And then Michelle said about Barack, he stayed up till 2 a.m. every night reading code books. And Hillary said of Bill, and of course Hillary's the same person as Bill as far as academically, no one studied harder than the Clintons. And Biden, we know, was a bona fide expert on foreign policy and the economy. An expert, not a person who knew a lot or thought they should do it. An expert, meaning you could ask him a question about the gross national product of the Dominican Republic and how it relates to our economy and what we're going to do about it. And he would give you a 45 fucking minute detailed point by point answer. Now we're at a point where yesterday he said, Melania has underwear in her drawer. We've dropped off the earth. So how do you make fun of that and have everyone still want to live?
Well, I think you didn't on the new record. Instead, you made fun of the logic, as much as we could tell, the apparent logic of how enough people voted for him to win.
Yeah.
And I don't think a lot of those ideas were necessarily new, though your linguistic gifts, packaged it nicely. But I feel like, okay, we're into the politics now, and it happened so fast and in such a big way that it was cathartic. Like, okay, we're not talking about it. And it's like, at some point we have to talk about some of it because it's the bane of our lives. But I felt like, and I'm not going to quote it because, people need to go listen to the record. And in fact, earlier this year for a podcast about, Sylvia Plath's poetry, right, I quoted a bit of yours and I reached out. I'm like, You know what? I think if my audience is going to hear Greg Proops' material, maybe it should be from Greg Proops and not
Oh, that's okay.
me doing my impression of Greg Proops.
I'm happy to be quoted. I really am. It's pretty thrilling to think anyone would. Every once in a while, someone on the internet will remember one of my jokes, and I'm always happy about that. I'll quote one of the jokes from it. What was it? The Nixon one. I started talking about Nixon, and I said he had an enemies list with John Lennon on it because you know how important pop music is to the political scene, and that the Beatles were going to go crazy at any point. But it's the same kind of paranoid delusion that's going on now, you know. If you think Jimmy Kimmel is a threat to society, you know, it's just, I'm going to try to come around it from another angle this time, I think, by telling stories that include elements that are going on now, and then sort of, as Tom Stoppard would say, draw them on to pleasures. Because I think distraction and obfuscation are how we're going to get around. I did one whole album in 2018 where I literally lambasted into him directly. I did that whole Hillary bit, juxtaposing the things he would say versus Hillary, the things he would act versus Obama, all those things. And it hasn't worked. It worked on the album, but
but that audience were, some of them were really, really creeped out. And
yeah,
it's not that it wasn't funny, but I do think of the Mark Twain line, nothing mars literature quite so much as too much truth.
right.
And so you found a way to, like, people are like, ugh. And you said, that's what's happening, guys. Like, if I put his words in Obama's mouth, it forces you to think about the choices we've made. Reminds me, on your podcast, right? You had the boring preachy bit every episode.
Yeah. And then people would say that was their favorite part because I was always like, oh God, here it comes, you know?
Well, there's a rhetorical strategy there, which is, all right, here's the boring preachy bit. Okay. And then it will end.
Yeah.
If you come on raging about politics at the beginning, like, okay, I don't know how long that's going to end, and I don't know what my tolerance for that's going to be. Whereas if we organically arrive at the boring preachy bit, whether it's, you know, on the podcast or in your comedy, okay, like as a bit, like and I don't mean like a comedy bit, like it's always has to be funny or that's the point. It's a segment of the show. It will come to an end. And maybe it's the politics dosage that we need.
Right. Well, I always tried to save it for towards the end. And then, of course, it always went on for 35 minutes. Jennifer will attest, like, we have to do a film club tonight, and we're showing Ninochka. And Jennifer picked Ninochka because, one, it's great. Two, it's really funny and pacey. And we only have two rules in the film club. Is it under 2 hours, and is it awesome? No, and our other rule is no Tarkovsky, no Kubrick, no David Lean, no anything that's who's the one who directed The Revenant? You know, the modern directors, Chris Nolan, 3.5 hours on Oppenheimer, you know. Everything has to be terse. And, but the reason she chose it is, of course, Russia. Because we're up to our ass in Russia right now. And it's a brilliant way to come around the corner and show you a movie from the 30s where, and I don't know that the audience is ready for this. There's jokes about mass murder. There's jokes about pogroms. There's jokes about starvation and famine in it. Billy Wilder and Charles Brackett laid the law down. There's even a shot, if you recall in the movie, where there's a photograph of Lenin, who had been ousted and the Bolsheviks massacred by Stalin by 1939 when the movie got made. And Wilder knew all about this. And they show a close-up of a photo of Lenin, and Lenin goes, like because it's Lubitsch. Lubitsch is so genius. He has Lenin like chuckling. And Lenin is such an odious, you know, figure. And I know the audience is going to fucking laugh at the Lenin joke. And I think that, you know, Wilder at his best, that's what he's the greatest at. And of course, writing for Lubitsch, who he worshipped, because Lubitsch is always about sex. So sex is the beginning and the end. Are they going to get together? Which lightens up the whole political. Oh my God, we're talking about a Stalinist regime,
Yeah.
because no one wants comedy about a Stalinist regime. It's what ruined that movie that Sasha made, that dictator movie a few years ago, because it was really literal. It was literally a dictator with a severed head and all this. And it was like, it's funny, but like you said, it's too, what did the Mark Twain line? There's too much truth. And I always wonder when I do those things and the audience goes, ugh, if I could have approached it another way comedically to not make them go, and that's what we're talking about. Yeah, it's important to talk about the truth, but it's also important to sneak the message in. I think Billy Wilder's later movies where the misogyny and the bitterness are more apparent than the comedy is when he loses the audience a little bit. And I think his 40s and 50s and early 60s movies is that beautiful, the combination of writing, cynicism, bitterness, awfulness. I mean, he made that. There's a movie Billy Wilder made called Ace in the Hole. I don't know if you've ever seen that one.
Nope, not yet.
But anyway, we're talking about writing. And Billy Wilder, of all directors, is probably the most acutely known as a writer's director because he didn't like camera tricks and he didn't like camera work. Whereas Lubitsch is a little more like Hitchcock, except that Hitchcock is the anti-sex director and there's never any talk about sex. It's all deferred. Whereas with Lubitsch, it's always sex. And this is the jumping off point. And making sex funny. I think one of the critics said about Lubitsch, the reason why he was so great was he wasn't afraid of sex. He embraced it. And so we were forced to deal with it, which because we're all thinking about it. He made a movie called Ace in the Hole. And it's in New Mexico in the 50s. Kirk Douglas is an out of work or a displaced reporter. He's had to move from New York City to some shithole in New Mexico because he blew it in New York City with the big paper he was with. A guy gets caught in a cave and he can't be removed. He's stuck. And the news gets back to Kirk and he immediately goes down and interviews the guy, seals everyone off from the story, calls New York and goes, all right, here's how much money I want. And within 2 days, there's TV crews there and literally a carnival set up. So now there's rides and people eating hot dogs and buying tchotchkes. And the title of the movie in England is The Big Carnival. And he goes down and interviews the guy and he's got exclusive rights to talk to him. They're trying to keep this guy alive. And then they find the wife of the guy. And the wife of the guy is a whore. She's a horrible bitch because it's Wilder. She's not an angel. And then, and that's what the movie's about. It's like La Dolce Vita Network. It's like a movie about the media.
Yeah.
And how horrible they are. Oh, the Front Page, which Wilder remade, but not as funny as the original Front Page. Because Hackton MacArthur knew all about it, where the guy's going to be executed and all the reporters, all they care about is the story. They don't give a fuck about the guy who died or the guy he killed, who in the movie, fantastically, is a black policeman, if you recall, which gives it even more, and it's not a fun movie. I mean, it's worth watching because it's astonishing, but it's not a movie you walk out of the theater going, man, that was really fun. And it ruined Wilder for a while because the studio was like, this is horrible. How am I supposed to sell this? Hey, come and spend 2 hours, watching someone bend the media to their, but again, it's more pointed than you can. So last month we showed Network. And I thought you'd enjoy this. You've seen Network.
Yes.
The idea of the mad, you were saying the boring preachy part, and that's what reminded me of it. They turned the network television evening news into a tabloid hour that has a horoscope, a lawyer, tabloid behind the keyhole, who's sleeping with who, and then the coup de grace at the end, the finale of every news program is Peter Finch coming out and ranting like a maniac until he passes out. And that's every single night on the news. And the ratings go through the roof, and then they start to dwindle a little bit because people get tired of him. And that's what I think about. Like you said, there needs to be an ending. With Peter Finch, he comes out and, what's that got to do with Christ Rice? God damn it. And then he whips himself into a tizzy, falls over, and everybody cheers, right? And this crowd that came to see it last month, some of them had seen the movie before. But I have to always remember there's people in their 20s and 30s who literally this means nothing to them. We're talking about network TV news, which was only important up till 20 years ago. It hasn't been important in a long time. And till they fired Dan Rather, basically,
Yeah.
that was sort of the moment when they just decided, the Republicans, we don't need that anymore. We don't need a responsible voice in the evening. We want chaos, and the crowd sat like this. It's a comedy. The movie's a comedy. It literally is a really nasty satirical comedy. And the crowd was frightened out of their wits. And
Too much truth. Too much truth.
It was, they loved it and they applauded at the end. And everybody got how great the performances were. Faye Dunaway is literally vibrating with sexual energy. William Holden's superb in it. Peter Finch is great. But Peter Finch's character doesn't change. Peter Finch is crazy at the beginning and then extra super crazy at the end. His arc is, I go off the deep end. Whereas everyone else is trying to cope with what the new reality is. Sidney Lumet, who made the movie, said, it isn't a satire, it's reportage. He said that 20 years after he made the movie. He watched it again and he went, ow,
Well, Roger Ailes was pissed that Nixon had to resign, saw Network and said, I'm going to make that, but angrier.
Yeah. Yes. People don't remember that Roger Ailes coached Bush Sr. And that when, I can't remember, was it Rather or Brokaw asked him if he had a mistress at the end of his administration, he broke out on him and got really angry, didn't answer the question and started screaming. And Roger Ailes said, stop holding your arm like a faggot. Because George Bush talked like that. And so George Bush started to do this and saw the error. And so when you see him in 92 debating Clinton and Perot, he holds his arms like this. He goes like that when he makes a point. He doesn't do that. And, fortunately, Roger Ailes is dead, but he had a lot to answer for. And I think that's where you're absolutely right. That's where we are now, because now we have the mad person who's talking about his wife's underwear at a political rally.
This month, December 2025, and last year in December, my podcast took over a local reading series devoted to current events. So I thought December of 2024 would be a fun night, but we booked it before the election. And, I had an essay that I'm reading, and I just stopped in the middle of it, and I'm like, I'm bored by this. I can't do it. Like, I could explain how we got here, but I don't know that it matters. And then I went into a eulogy for a friend who had passed away, which cheered everybody up because it wasn't about politics. Every New Year's Eve, you perform in San Francisco and usually cut a record. So I want you to break a leg for that. And, as far as I'm concerned, you're allowed as many boring, preachy bits as you want.
Thanks, pal.